It wasn't the biting frost of the English dawn that made Lydia tremble as she buried herself beneath the scratchy hay. It was the sound of hoofbeats thundering against the earth, getting closer. She had traded her silk gown for a stable boy's rags, and her future for a desperate chance at freedom. But when the stable doors creaked open, it wasn't her pursuers who found her. It was him. Arthur Caldwell, the Duke of Ashbourne, a man rumoured to have a heart made of winter ice. She thought her life was over. She had no idea it was just beginning. The year was 1814, and the fog clinging to the rolling hills of Derbyshire was thick enough to choke a man. But for Lydia Rose's heart, the fog was a blessing. It was a shroud, a grey blanket that hid her fleeing figure as she scrambled over the stone wall and dropped into the soft, damp earth of the Ashbourne estate. Her lungs burned. Every breath felt like inhaling broken glass. She had been running for 6 hours, ever since she slipped a sleeping draught into her stepmother's evening sherry and climbed out the window of the carriage that was transporting her to a fate worse than death. Lord Frederick was waiting for her in London, a man with a smile like a rusted trap and hands that left bruises even when he was being gentle. He was 30 years her senior, and his debts were substantial. Lydia's dowry was the only thing that would keep him from debtor's prison, and her stepmother had sold her like a prize mare to ensure the family's financial security. "Not today," Lydia whispered, her voice cracking. "I will not belong to him." She stumbled toward the massive stone structure looming in the distance, the Ashbourne stables. They were legendary, said to house the finest thoroughbreds in England, owned by a man who cared more for horses than for people. Lydia slipped through a side door, the heavy smell of leather, oats, and warm animal bodies washing over her. It was comforting. She found an empty stall near the back, piled high with fresh hay, and burrowed deep, pulling the scratchy stalks over her shivering body. She curled into a tight ball, clutching the small velvet pouch that held her mother's locket, the only thing she truly owned. Exhaustion pulled at her eyelids. Just an hour. She would rest for just an hour, and then she would steal a horse and ride for the coast. She didn't hear the heavy oak doors slide open an hour later. She didn't hear the confident, rhythmic click of riding boots against the cobblestone floor. What woke her was the sound of a deep, baritone voice, calm, cold, and dangerously close. "Easy, Titan. What has you so agitated this morning?" Lydia froze. Her heart hammered against her ribs, so hard she feared the man would hear it. Through the gaps in the hay, she saw him. Arthur Caldwell, the Duke of Ashbourne. He was taller than the gossip column suggested, with broad shoulders that strained against his dark riding coat. His hair was the colour of midnight, wind-swept and unruly, and his profile was sharp, cut from granite. He was stroking the nose of a massive black stallion in the adjacent stall. The stallion, Titan, snorted and pawed the ground, tossing his head toward the pile of hay where Lydia lay hidden. Animals always knew. "What is it?" Arthur murmured, his voice devoid of warmth but commanding absolute authority. He turned, his gaze narrowing as it swept over the seemingly empty stall. Lydia held her breath. "Please, just leave. Just tack up the horse and go." Arthur took a step closer. He didn't shout. He didn't call for a stable hand. He simply reached out, grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the wall, and used the handle to sweep back the top layer of hay with a single powerful motion. Lydia gasped, scrambling backward, her eyes wide with terror. Arthur didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. He stood perfectly still, the pitchfork resting loosely in his hand, staring down at the dirty, trembling figure in his stables. His eyes were a startling, icy blue, cold enough to freeze the blood in her veins. I have a rule, Arthur said, his tone conversational, as if he found ragged women in his stables every Tuesday. I do not tolerate rats in my barn, especially the two-legged variety. Lydia scrambled to her knees, raising her hands. Please, Your Grace. I'm not a thief. You are trespassing, he observed, his eyes scanning her. He took in the dirt-smudged face, the torn hem of her dress disguised under a stolen rough wool cloak, and the undeniable quality of the boots she wore, boots that no peasant could afford. I only needed rest, Lydia pleaded, her voice shaking. I will leave, immediately. You will not, Arthur said. He stepped forward, blocking the exit. You are running from something. People who sleep in stables at dawn are either drunkards or fugitives. You do not smell of gin, so I must assume the latter. Lydia lifted her chin, a spark of defiance cutting through her fear. What I am is none of your concern, my lord. If you have any honor, you will let me pass. Arthur tilted his head, a flicker of interest igniting in those cold eyes. Honor? You break into my estate and lecture me on honor? Suddenly, the sound of shouting drifted from the courtyard outside. Search the grounds. She cannot have gone far. Lydia's blood ran cold. She recognized that voice. It was Mr. Griggs, Lord Frederick's head of security, a brute of a man who enjoyed his work far too much. She looked at the stable door, then back at the Duke. The defiance vanished, replaced by sheer, naked desperation. She scrambled up and grabbed the lapel of his riding coat, heedless of the impropriety. Please, she whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. If they find me, they will take me back to a monster. I would rather die in this stable than go with them. Arthur looked down at her small hand gripping his expensive coat. He looked at the terror in her eyes, genuine, raw terror. He heard the heavy boots of the search party crunching on the gravel outside. The ice Duke remained motionless. Then the stable door burst open. You there! Griggs bellowed, stepping into the dim light, followed by two other men. We are looking for a girl, runaway, stole from Lord Frederick. Arthur slowly turned his head. He didn't release Lydia, who was now cowering behind him, but he shifted his stance, effectively shielding her from view with his broad frame. And you are? Arthur asked. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Griggs faltered. The authority radiating from the Duke was palpable. I work for Lord Frederick, Your Grace. We tracked the girl here. And you decided to burst into my private stables without an invitation? Arthur's voice was soft, silky, and terrifying. Lord Frederick forgets his manners. The girl, Griggs insisted, trying to peer around Arthur. She's here. We know she's here. Arthur took a step forward, forcing Griggs to step back. I am going for my morning ride. The only thing in this stable is me, my horses, and my patience, which is rapidly thinning. Unless you wish to explain to the magistrate why you trespassed on Ashbourne land and harassed a peer of the realm, I suggest you leave. But now, Arthur barked. The single word cracked like a whip. Griggs looked at the Duke, then at his men. He spat on the ground, scowled, and turned on his heel. We'll be watching the perimeter. As the doors swung shut, Lydia let out a sob of relief, her knees buckling. She would have hit the stone floor if Arthur hadn't caught her. He held her up by her arms, his grip firm but not painful. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Do not mistake my intervention for kindness, miss. He paused, waiting. Hart, she whispered. Lydia Hart. Miss Hart, he finished. I did not save you. I merely dislike Lord Frederick more than I dislike trespassers. But now you owe me, and I always collect my debts. Arthur dragged her, politely but firmly, through the back entrance of Ashbourne Manor. The transition from the damp, earthy smell of the stables to the polished, lavender-scented air of the house was jarring. Lydia felt acutely aware of her filth as their boots clicked against the black-and-white marble of the servants' corridor. "Mrs. Higgins!" Arthur called out, his voice echoing. A stout, elderly woman with a ring of keys at her waist bustled out of the kitchens, wiping flour from her hands. She stopped dead when she saw Lydia. "Lord save us!" Mrs. Higgins gasped. "Your Grace, what have you brought in? A chimney sweep?" "A guest, Mrs. Higgins," Arthur said dryly. "Please have a bath drawn in the east wing. Burn these rags she is wearing. Find her something suitable, perhaps one of my sister's old gowns from storage, and send up a tray of food, meat, bread, fruit. She looks as though a strong wind would blow her into the next county." "The east wing?" Mrs. Higgins's eyebrows shot up. "But Your Grace, that's right next to your chambers. Surely the guest quarters." "The east wing," Arthur repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "She is not to be seen by anyone other than you and me. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Grace." An hour later, Lydia sat in a copper tub filled with steaming water, scrubbing the grime from her skin with a sponge that cost more than her stepmother's entire wardrobe. The heat soaked into her bones, melting the chill of the flight, but it couldn't melt the knot of anxiety in her stomach. "I owe him," he had said. When she emerged, clean and dressed in a simple but elegant muslin gown of pale blue, she felt like a different person. She looked in the mirror. Her dark brown hair, usually pinned tight, fell in soft waves around her shoulders. Her hazel eyes, wide and wary, stared back. There was a knock at the door. "Enter," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Arthur walked in. He had changed from his riding gear into a crisp grey morning suit. He looked every inch the aristocrat, detached, powerful, and impossibly distant. He didn't sit. He stood by the fireplace, leaning an arm against the mantel. "You clean up well, Miss Hart," he said, his eyes analyzing her like a horse he was considering buying. "Thank you for the bath, Your Grace. And for earlier." Lydia stood straight, folding her hands in front of her. "I will be gone by nightfall. I do not wish to bring trouble to your door." "Trouble is already at my door," Arthur said, turning to look into the flames. "Lord Frederick's men are patrolling the borders of my estate. They believe you are here. If you leave, they will catch you within the hour." Lydia gripped the back of a chair. "Then what am I to do?" Arthur turned back to face her. "You need protection. I need a diversion." "A diversion?" "My aunt, Lady Beatrice, arrives tomorrow," Arthur explained, his expression souring. "She is a relentless woman with one goal in life, to see me married. She brings with her a parade of debutantes, simpering, giggling women who only want the title of Duchess. I have no patience for it. I have work to do." Lydia frowned, confused. "And what does this have to do with me?" Arthur walked toward her, stopping just a foot away. The air between them crackled. "I need a fiancé," he stated calmly. Lydia's mouth fell open. "You must be joking." "I never joke, Miss Hart. It is inefficient." He paced around her. "You are obviously educated. You speak like a gentlewoman. You are undeniably beautiful, despite your earlier attempts at camouflage. And most importantly, you are desperate." He stopped in front of her again. "Here is the deal. You will pose as my betrothed. You will play the part of the woman who finally melted the Ice Duke's heart. This will force my aunt to send the other debutantes away. In exchange, you will remain under my protection within these walls. Lord Frederick cannot touch the future Duchess of Ashbourne." "And when your aunt leaves?" Lydia asked, her mind racing. "We will stage a tragic breakup. I will provide you with a substantial sum of money, enough to go to the continent, America, wherever you wish. You will be free." Lydia looked at him. It was madness. It was a lie. But the alternative was Lord Frederick's dungeon or his bed. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why help me? You could hire an actress." Arthur's eyes darkened, a flash of something painful and ancient flickering behind the blue ice. "Let's just say that any enemy of Lord Frederick is a friend of mine. Do we have an accord?" He held out his hand. Lydia looked at the large, calloused hand of the Duke. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "We have an accord, Your Grace." She placed her hand in his. His grip was warm, shocking her. "Good," Arthur said. "And call me Arthur. We are supposed to be in love, after all." The next morning, Ashbourne Manor was thrown into chaos. Carriages arrived, trunks were unloaded, and the shrill voice of Lady Beatrice echoed through the marble halls. Lydia stood at the top of the grand staircase, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was wearing a gown of emerald silk that Arthur had miraculously procured from a local modiste overnight. It was cut low enough to be fashionable, but high enough to be modest, and it hugged her curves in a way that made her feel exposed. "Breathe," Arthur whispered. He appeared beside her, offering his arm. "She can smell fear." "I thought that was dogs," Lydia whispered back. "Beatrice is part bloodhound," Arthur replied, the corner of his mouth twitching in almost smile. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less severe. Lydia stared for a second too long before snapping her gaze forward. They descended the stairs together. Lady Beatrice was a formidable woman in purple velvet, holding a lorgnette as if it were a weapon. She was currently berating a footman about the placement of a fern. When she saw Arthur, her face lit up, but then her gaze slid to Lydia, and her smile vanished. "Arthur!" she cried, marching forward. "And who is this?" Arthur squeezed Lydia's hand where it rested on his arm. "Aunt Beatrice, I am delighted you are here. I would like you to meet Miss Lydia Hart, my betrothed." Silence descended on the hall. The servants froze. Lady Beatrice dropped her lorgnette. It swung on its chain, hitting her bodice with a dull thud. "Betrothed!" Beatrice squeaked. But who is she? I do not know the family. Is she a Hart of Somerset, or the Cumberland Harts?" "She is a Hart of privacy," Arthur said smoothly. "She has been living quietly in the country. We met while I was inspecting the tenant farms. It was instant." Lydia looked up at him, feigning adoration. "He saved me from a runaway carriage, Lady Beatrice. He was quite heroic." Arthur looked down at her, and for a moment the acting felt too real. "Lydia captured me, Aunt. I had no choice." Beatrice narrowed her eyes, circling Lydia like a shark. "She is pretty, I suppose. A bit pale. Good hips for childbearing." Lydia choked on air. Arthur patted her back gently. "Aunt, please," Arthur warned, his voice dropping. "Well," Beatrice huffed, "if you are engaged, we must celebrate. The ball on Saturday remains, but instead of a matchmaking event, it shall be an engagement ball. I will invite everyone. The ton will be dying to see the woman who caught the Wolf of Ashbourne." Lydia went rigid. "Everyone?" "Everyone who is anyone," Beatrice declared. "The earls, the barons. Oh, and I believe Lord Frederick is in the area, hunting. I shall invite him too. He owes me a whist game." Lydia's fingernails dug into Arthur's forearm. She felt the blood drain from her face. Arthur didn't flinch. He covered her hand with his own, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a soothing rhythm that contradicted the tension in his jaw. "That will be delightful, Aunt," Arthur said, his eyes locking with Lydia's. The message was clear. "Trust me." I look forward to introducing Lydia to our neighbours." Later in the library, Lydia paced the length of the Persian rug. "He will be here," she hissed. "Lord Frederick, in this house. He will recognize me." Arthur sat behind his massive oak desk, pouring 2 glasses of amber brandy. "He will not. You look nothing like the girl in the stables, and even if he suspects, he cannot accuse the future Duchess of Ashbourne without proof. He is a monster, Arthur. You don't know what he is capable of." "I know exactly what he is capable of," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a growl. He slammed the decanter down, the glass ringing. Lydia stopped pacing. She looked at him, really looked at him. The mask of the Ice Duke had slipped. There was rage in his eyes, hot and blistering. "What did he do to you?" Lydia asked softly. "You said you dislike him. It is more than that." Arthur took a long drink of the brandy. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the foggy moors. 10 years ago," Arthur began, his voice rough, "my younger sister, Eleanor, was courted by a charming man. He was older, wealthy, respected. We thought it was a good match. But after the wedding he changed. He isolated her. He disciplined her." Lydia covered her mouth with her hand. "She died a year later," Arthur said, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more heartbreaking. "A fall from a horse," they said. "But I saw the bruises on her arms at the funeral. I knew." He turned to face Lydia. "That man was Lord Frederick." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. "Arthur, I was young. I had just inherited the title. I had no power to prove it. But I swore I would destroy him. I have been waiting for a weakness, a loose thread to pull that would unravel his life." He walked over to her, his gaze intense. "You, Lydia, you are the loose thread. You are the witness to his cruelty that I never had for Eleanor. If we can make him reveal himself, if we can provoke him—" "You are using me as bait," Lydia whispered. She wasn't angry, she was terrified. "I am asking you to help me kill a monster," Arthur corrected. "But I will not force you. If you want to leave, I will have a carriage ready tonight. You can go to France." Lydia looked at the man standing before her. He was no longer the cold Duke. He was a grieving brother seeking justice. And she was tired of running. She thought of the bruises Frederick had left on her arm. She thought of the other girls he might hurt. Lydia straightened her spine. She took the glass of brandy from his hand and took a sip, the liquid burning her throat. "I don't speak French," she said, "and I look terrible in berets." A slow, genuine smile spread across Arthur's face. It was breathtaking. "Then we have a ball to prepare for," he said. The 3 days leading up to the engagement ball were a blur of silk, strategy, and suffocating tension. Ashbourne Manor transformed into a fortress of frenetic energy under Lady Beatrice's command. Yet, within the eye of this storm, Lydia and Arthur existed in a strange, quiet bubble of forced intimacy. They had to become convincing. They had to know each other's histories, their fictional, meet-cute, their favorite poets, and their dislikes. They spent hours in the library, supposedly cataloguing books, but in reality, mapping out the geography of a lie. "My favorite flower is the hothouse orchid," Lydia recited, pacing the Persian rug. "Expensive, delicate, high maintenance. Exactly what a future duchess should like." Arthur, seated in a leather armchair, looked up from a ledger. "Incorrect. You despise orchids. You find them cloying. You prefer wildflowers, specifically the bluebells that grow near the creek on your father's old estate." Lydia stopped, surprised. "How did you know that?" "I listened when you were talking to Mrs. Higgins about the floral arrangements," Arthur said, his tone matter of fact. If we are to convince the ton that I am madly in love with you, I must appear to know the real you, not the performance." A flush warmed Lydia's cheeks. He was listening. The Ice Duke, who barely seemed to tolerate human presence, noticed the details of her preferences. "Very well," she said, softening. "And you? You dislike poetry. You tolerate opera only for social obligation, and your true passion is agricultural reform." A ghost of a smile touched Arthur's lips. "Precisely. I am terribly boring. You evidently find this rugged pragmatism charming." The greatest challenge, however, was the waltz. It was late evening on the day before the ball. The grand ballroom was empty, save for the moonlight streaming through the high windows, pooling on the polished floor. "We must dance the first waltz," Arthur declared, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. "It is tradition, and it is the moment everyone will judge us. If we look stiff, if there is a chasm between us, Frederick will see it." Lydia's stomach tightened. The waltz was an intimate dance, requiring a closeness she had never experienced with a man, certainly not one as imposing as Arthur. He walked toward her, extending a hand. "Shall we, my dear?" Lydia placed her trembling hand in his. He pulled her close, closer than necessary, his right hand settling firmly on the curve of her waist. The heat of his palm seeped through the thin muslin of her practice dress, branding her skin. "Relax," he murmured against her hair. "You are stiff as a board. You look like you are facing a firing squad, not your betrothed." "I am terrified," she confessed, whispering so as not to break the silence of the room. "I am afraid I will trip. I am afraid I will betray us." "Look at me," Arthur commanded gently. She raised her eyes to his. In the moonlight, his eyes were not icy. They were the color of a deep, turbulent ocean. "Forget the room," he said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated against her chest. "Forget Frederick. Forget the lie. Right now, there is only you and me. Follow my lead. I will not let you fall." He began to move. He didn't need music. He had an internal rhythm, strong and assured. He guided her effortlessly, sweeping her into turns that made the room spin. Lydia gasped, clutching his shoulder tighter. He held her secure. For the first time in weeks, perhaps years, Lydia felt safe. The fear of Frederick, the anxiety of the deception, it all faded away, replaced by the scent of Arthur's soap, sandalwood and cold air, and the strength of his arms. They fell into a rhythm, moving as one entity. Lydia found herself leaning into him, trusting his guidance implicitly. During a slow turn, her face ended up inches from his. They stopped moving, but he didn't let go. The silence stretched, heavy and charged. Arthur's gaze dropped to her lips. Lydia's breath hitched. It wasn't part of the performance anymore. The air crackled with unspoken need. Two lonely souls finding resonance in the dark. He leaned in just an inch. Lydia tilted her chin up, her eyelids fluttering closed. Kriak. The massive ballroom doors groaned open. Light spilled in from the hallway, breaking the spell. "There you are!" Lady Beatrice boomed, marching in with a footman trailing behind her, laden with candelabras. "Practicing in the dark? How scandalous, it's perfect." Arthur immediately stepped back, the mask of the Duke slamming back into place. But as he released Lydia's waist, his fingers lingered for a fraction of a second too long, a silent acknowledgement of the heat that had just dissipated into the cold night air. The night of the ball arrived with the force of a hurricane. Ashbourne Manor was ablaze with light, every crystal chandelier gleaming. Carriages snaked down the long driveway, depositing the cream of British society onto the front steps. Lydia stood at the top of the grand staircase next to Arthur, her heart performing acrobatics in her chest. She wore a gown of sapphire blue silk, embroidered with silver thread that caught the light like trapped stars. The Ashbourne diamonds, a necklace heavy with history and worth a small fortune, rested cold against her collarbone. "You look magnificent," Arthur said quietly, offering his arm. He looked devastatingly handsome in formal black tie, the starkness of his attire emphasizing the sharp lines of his face. "I feel like a lamb dressed for slaughter," Lydia whispered back, taking his arm. Her knuckles were white. "You are a wolf tonight, Lydia," Arthur corrected fiercely. "Remember that. You are under my protection. You are untouchable." They descended the stairs to a hushed room. Hundreds of eyes turned upward. The murmurs began immediately. Speculation, judgment, envy. Lydia held her head high, plastering on the serene smile they had practiced in the mirror. The night was a whirlwind of introductions. Lydia curtsied until her knees ached, deflected invasive questions with charming vagueness, and laughed at jokes she didn't understand. Arthur stayed by her side, a silent, looming presence that deterred the bolder gossip-mongers. Then the majordomo struck the floor with his staff. "Lord Frederick Milton, and party!" The air left the room. Lydia felt Arthur go rigid beside her. Frederick entered. He was a handsome man in a superficial way, with blonde hair and easy charm that masked the rot beneath. He wore velvet of a deep crimson, a stark contrast to the sea of black coats. He spotted them almost immediately. A slow, oily smile spread across his face as he began to cut through the crowd toward them. "Steady," Arthur murmured, his hand covering Lydia's on his arm. His grip was iron. "Your Grace." Frederick bowed smoothly as he reached them, though his eyes were fixed on Lydia. There was no recognition in them, only appreciation for a beautiful new conquest. A splendid affair. And this must be the lady who has achieved the impossible. "Lord Frederick," Arthur greeted, his voice devoid of inflection. "May I present my betrothed, Miss Lydia Hart?" Frederick took Lydia's gloved hand and raised it to his lips. His eyes, a pale, watery blue, bored into hers. Lydia fought the urge to snatch her hand away and vomit. "Charmed, Miss Hart," Frederick purred. He lingered over her hand. "Hart. A lovely name. Have we met before? You seem terribly familiar." Lydia's heart stopped. "I think not, my lord," Arthur interjected smoothly, physically stepping slightly in front of Lydia. "Lydia has rarely left Derbyshire. You travel in different circles." Frederick laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Indeed. Well, congratulations, Ashbourne. You have excellent taste. Though I must say I am surprised. I heard rumours you preferred your women a bit more spirited, less domesticated." It was a dig at Arthur's late sister, Eleanor, a cruel reference to how Frederick had broken her spirit. Arthur's jaw tightened so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. Lydia saw the rage bubbling just beneath the surface, the urge to strike Frederick down right there on the ballroom floor. Lydia squeezed Arthur's arm, hard, a silent plea for restraint. "Not now. Remember the plan." "Lydia is everything I require," Arthur said, his voice deadly quiet. The orchestra struck up the first waltz. "Duty calls," Arthur said abruptly. He nodded to Frederick and swept Lydia onto the dance floor. The waltz was different from their practice in the moonlight. They were on display. Every turn, every touch was scrutinized. But as they moved, Arthur's gaze locked onto hers, grounding her. "He suspects nothing," Arthur assured her softly as they spun. "He is merely fishing." "He is vile," Lydia whispered, her voice shaking. "Did you see his eyes? It was as if he was undressing me." "I saw." Arthur promised darkly. He will not look at you like that again. They made it through the dance, a perfect picture of aristocratic romance. As the music ended, Arthur had to leave her briefly to speak with an elderly duke about some political matter. "Stay by the punch bowl. Do not wander," he instructed. "I will be back in 5 minutes." Lydia nodded, taking a glass of lemonade from a passing waiter. She watched Arthur walk away, feeling exposed without his physical presence shielding her. She turned to watch the dancers, trying to calm her nerves. A shadow fell over her. The lovely Miss Hart, all alone. Frederick's voice slithered into her ear. Lydia spun around, nearly dropping her glass. He was too close. The smell of his overly sweet cologne filled her nostrils, triggering a wave of nauseous memory. "My lord is returning momentarily," Lydia said quickly, looking around for an escape route. "Oh, I'm sure he is. Ashbourne is very possessive of his new toys." Frederick stepped closer, forcing Lydia to back up until she hit a marble pillar. He leaned in, dropping his voice to a sinister whisper. "You put on a good show, my dear. The hair, the dress, the diamonds, almost had me fooled, but I never forget a face that owes me money." Lydia froze. The blood drained from her face. "Did you really think you could hide from me in the bed of my enemy?" Frederick hissed, his charming mask dissolving into pure menace. "Your stepmother is frantic. She thinks you've been kidnapped. I should have known you were too conniving for that." I don't know what you mean," Lydia stammered, terrified. "Don't lie to me, you little whore," Frederick snarled softly. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into the delicate skin beneath her glove, hidden by the folds of her dress. "Listen to me carefully. You are going to leave this ball. You are going to meet my carriage at the East Gate in 20 minutes. If you don't, I won't just expose you as a runaway debtor." He leaned closer, his breath hot on her ear. "I will tell everyone the real reason your father lost his fortune. I will tell them he was a Jacobite traitor, funneling gold to France, and that by harboring the daughter of a traitor, the Duke of Ashbourne is guilty of high treason against the crown." Lydia gasped. "That's not true. My father was an honorable man." "It doesn't matter what is true," Frederick sneered. "It matters what I can prove, and I have documents forged by the best hands in London. Ashbourne will hang, and you will watch. Now, be a good girl. 20 minutes. East Gate." He released her wrist with a shove and melted back into the crowd, leaving Lydia gasping for air, her world tilting on its axis. Lydia stumbled away from the pillar, her vision blurred with tears of panic. The bright lights of the ballroom felt blinding now, the laughter of the guests mocking. Treason. Frederick wasn't just coming for her. He was going to destroy Arthur. He was going to use her to hang the man who had saved her. She couldn't let that happen. Arthur wanted vengeance for his sister, yes, but he hadn't signed up to die for Lydia's past. The deal was off. The only way to save him was to remove herself from the equation, completely and irrevocably. She had to leave, now, before Arthur came back, before she lost her nerve. But she couldn't just disappear. That would look suspicious. It would make Arthur look weak, or worse, complicit. She had to give him an out. She had to make it seem like she was the villain, and he was the wronged party. She spotted Lady Beatrice near the orchestra pit, holding court with 3 other matrons. Lydia took a deep, shuddering breath, wiping the tears from her eyes. She had to perform one last time. Lydia marched toward Lady Beatrice. When she was 10 feet away, she stopped and loudly exclaimed, "I cannot do this anymore." The music seemed to screech to a halt. Conversation died in the immediate vicinity. Lady Beatrice turned, her eyes wide. "Lydia? My dear, what is it?" Lydia wrung her hands together, pitching her voice so it carried to the surrounding groups. "I cannot marry him, Lady Beatrice. I truly tried to love him. But his heart, it is a glacier. He is cold, unfeeling. He only cares for his horses and his ledgers. I will wither and die in this mausoleum of a house." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This was delicious scandal. The Ice Duke, jilted at his own engagement ball. Arthur appeared through the crowd, his face a mask of thunderous confusion. He had heard the end of her outburst. "Lydia? What is the meaning of this?" He reached for her. Lydia flinched away dramatically. "Do not touch me. I am leaving, Arthur. Tonight. I made a terrible mistake." She turned and fled the ballroom, ignoring Lady Beatrice's cries and the murmurs of the crowd. She ran up the grand staircase, tears finally falling freely. She made it to the corridor leading to the east wing before a hand clamped onto her shoulder, spinning her around. Arthur shoved her into a small alcove, his body blocking her escape. His face was pale with fury, his blue eyes blazing. "What in God's name was that performance downstairs?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "We had a plan. You just humiliated me before half of England." "I had to," Lydia sobbed, pushing against his chest, though it was like pushing a stone wall. "You have to let me go, Arthur. The deal is over." "Why?" He grabbed her wrists, forcing her to look at him. "Did Frederick get to you?" "What did he say?" "He knows," Lydia whispered, frantically. "He knows who I am." And he said my father was a traitor, a Jacobite. He said he has proof, forged proof, and that if I don't leave with him, he will accuse you of harboring a traitor. He will have you hanged for treason, Arthur." She looked up at him, desperation in her eyes. "I cannot let you die for me. I have to go to him. It's the only way to save you." Arthur stared down at her. The rage in his eyes didn't diminish, but it shifted. It wasn't directed at her anymore. Suddenly, he threw his head back and laughed. It was a harsh, barking sound that had no humor in it. Lydia stared at him, horrified. "Why are you laughing? This is my life. This is your life." Arthur stopped laughing, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read. It was almost pity. "Lydia," he said, his voice frighteningly calm. "Frederick is a liar, and a clumsy one at that." "But the documents are worthless," Arthur snapped. "Your father was no traitor. He was a foolish gambler, yes, but loyal to the core. I know this because I am the one who investigated his estate 5 years ago, when the Crown grew suspicious of his sudden debts." Lydia gaped at him. "You?" "I found the truth," Arthur said. "Frederick was your father's primary creditor. He was cheating him at cards, driving him into ruin so he could seize his lands cheap. When your father threatened to expose him, Frederick concocted the treason story to silence him. Your father died of a heart attack from the stress before Frederick could use it." Arthur stepped closer, his intensity radiating off him in waves. "Frederick doesn't have proof of treason. He has proof of his own villainy. He used that same threat on you tonight, because it worked on your father." Lydia felt her knees give out. It was all a lie. Her father wasn't a traitor, and she almost walked back into the monster's trap to save Arthur from a threat that wasn't real. "He is waiting for me," Lydia whispered, horrified realization dawning. "At the east gate, in 20 minutes. Arthur's face turned terrifyingly cold. The Ice Duke returned, but this time he was armed with the fires of vengeance. "Is he indeed?" Arthur checked his pocket watch. "Then we shouldn't keep him waiting." "We?" "You wanted to help me kill a monster, Lydia," Arthur said, pulling her close, his grip almost painful. "Tonight is the night." He took her hand and began dragging her, not toward the front entrance, but toward the servants' stairs that led down to the stables. "But Arthur," Lydia cried, trying to keep up with his long strides. "If he sees you—" "He won't see me," Arthur vowed. "Not until it is too late." They burst out into the cool night air near the stables. The sounds of the ball were muffled here. "Stay here," Arthur commanded, pushing her into the shadows of a large oak tree. "Do not move until I return." Before Lydia could protest, he disappeared into the stable block. A moment later, he emerged, not on the magnificent Titan, but on a sleek, dark mare that blended perfectly with the night. He carried no riding crop, but Lydia saw the glint of a pistol tucked into his waistband. He looked at her one last time, his eyes burning in the dark. "If I am not back in an hour," he said, his voice devoid of the earlier rage, replaced by a chilling calm, "take Titan and ride for London. Go to my solicitor. He has instructions." "Arthur, please don't." He didn't wait for her plea. He kicked the mare into a gallop, disappearing into the darkness toward the east gate, toward the man who had haunted both their nightmares. Lydia pressed her back against the rough bark of the oak tree, the music of the waltz drifting faintly on the breeze, a perverse soundtrack to the waiting game. The cold night air bit through her thin silk dress, but the deepest chill came from the terrified certainty that tonight blood would be spilled on the Ashbourne estate. Lydia waited. The seconds stretched into minutes, each one a jagged shard of ice in her chest. The music from the manor had ceased, replaced by the heavy, suffocating silence of the English countryside at night. The wind howled through the oak branches, sounding like whispering ghosts. "Stay here," he had said. But Lydia Hart had spent her entire life staying where she was told, waiting for men to decide her fate. She had waited for her father to stop gambling. She had waited for her stepmother to show mercy. She had waited for Frederick to tire of her. She looked at the stable doors. Titan, the massive black stallion Arthur adored, was pacing in his stall, sensing the tension in the air. "No more waiting," Lydia whispered. She didn't saddle the beast. There was no time. She grabbed a bridle from the wall, slipped it over Titan's head, and led him to the mounting block. She gathered her silk skirts, hauled herself onto the horse's bare back, and gripped his mane. Titan reared slightly, surprised by the light weight and the frantic energy of the rider. But he obeyed her kick. They thundered out of the stable yard, tearing up the turf as they galloped toward the east gate. The ride was a blur of shadows and wind. As the iron gates loomed out of the fog, Lydia pulled Titan to a halt, sliding off before the horse had fully stopped. She crouched behind a hedgerow, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The scene before her was illuminated by the swinging lantern of a black carriage. Lord Frederick stood by the open door, his face twisted in a sneer. But he wasn't looking at Lydia. He was looking at the barrel of a pistol. Arthur sat atop his mare, steady as a statue, the gun leveled directly at Frederick's chest. "You are making a mistake, Ashbourne," Frederick spat, though his voice wavered. "Shoot me and you hang. I am a peer of the realm." "You are a bankrupt fraud," Arthur said, his voice terrifyingly conversational. "And I have no intention of shooting you, Frederick. Death is too quick for a man who has spent a decade destroying lives." Frederick laughed nervously. "You have nothing? A few rumors? The girl's word? Who will believe a runaway debtor over me?" "I believe him." The voice came from the shadows behind the carriage. Frederick spun around. Mr. Griggs, Frederick's own head of security, stepped into the light. But he wasn't alone. Beside him stood the local magistrate and 2 armed constables. "Griggs!" Frederick gasped, backing away until he hit the carriage wheel. "What is this? I pay you." "The Duke pays better," Griggs grunted, crossing his arms. and he promised me immunity if I handed over the ledger you keep under the floorboards of your townhome, the one detailing the forgery ring you've been running to steal estates from widows and orphans." Lydia covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. Arthur hadn't just ridden out to fight. He had orchestrated a coup. He had bought Frederick's loyalty out from under him. Arthur lowered his pistol, a cold, satisfied smile touching his lips. "It's over, Frederick. The magistrate has reviewed the documents Griggs provided. Treason? No. But fraud, extortion, and the falsification of debt? That will send you to Newgate Prison for the rest of your natural life." "No!" Frederick shrieked, his composure shattering. He lunged for the carriage, trying to scramble inside to grab a weapon. "Titan!" The scream tore from Lydia's throat before she could stop it. She burst from the hedgerow, running towards the fray. Distracted by her voice, Frederick spun around, his eyes wild. He saw Lydia and snarled, pulling a small knife from his boot. He wasn't going for the carriage, he was lunging for her, a final act of spite to hurt the thing Arthur tried to protect. "Lydia, get back!" Arthur roared. He spurred his mare forward, but he was too far. Frederick was closing the distance, the knife glinting in the lantern light. Suddenly, a massive black shape blurred past Lydia. Titan, the stallion she had left untethered, had followed her. The horse, sensing the aggression and protecting the woman who had hidden in his hay, charged. He slammed his shoulder into Frederick with the force of a runaway train. Frederick flew backward, hitting the dirt with a sickening crunch. He groaned once, curled into a ball, and lay still. Silence descended on the lane. Arthur was off his horse in a second. He ignored the groaning Frederick, ignored the constables rushing to shackle the fallen lord, and sprinted to Lydia. He grabbed her face in his hands, his eyes frantically scanning her for injury. The Ice Duke was gone. In his place was a man trembling with adrenaline and terror. "I told you to stay," he choked out, his voice rough. "You foolish, stubborn woman." "He had a knife. I couldn't wait." Lydia wept, gripping his wrists. "I couldn't let you face him alone." "Is he—" "He is finished," Arthur vowed, pulling her into his chest. He buried his face in her hair, breathing her in as if she were the only air left in the world. "He will never hurt you again. He will never hurt anyone again." The constables dragged a dazed and broken Lord Frederick away. As the carriage rolled off toward the county jail, the first grey light of dawn began to bleed over the horizon. The exact same time of day Lydia had first hidden in Arthur's stables. They walked back to the manor leading the horses, Arthur's arm wrapped tightly around her waist. When they reached the grand foyer, the house was quiet. The guests had departed, whispering about the scandal of the Duke's fiancée fleeing the ball. Lady Beatrice was sitting on the bottom step of the staircase, weeping into a handkerchief. She looked up as the doors opened. Her eyes widened as she saw Arthur and Lydia, dishevelled, covered in mud, but very much together. "Arthur!" Beatrice gasped. "Lydia, but the shouting? The break-up?" Arthur stopped at the base of the stairs. He looked at Lydia. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind a stark, undeniable truth. "The break-up was a lie, Aunt," Arthur said softly. "A strategy to draw out a viper." He turned to Lydia. He took both her hands, his thumbs brushing over the dirt smudges on her knuckles. "The engagement, however," Arthur started, his voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. "It began as a lie. It began as a transaction. But I find myself unwilling to dissolve the contract." Lydia's breath hitched. "Arthur?" "I have spent 10 years feeling nothing but cold," he said, looking deep into her eyes. "I thought my heart died with Eleanor. But then I found a girl sleeping in my hay, and she set my world on fire. You are the bravest person I have ever known, Lydia Hart." He slowly dropped to one knee on the marble floor. Lady Beatrice let out a squeak of shock and clamped her hand over her mouth. "I do not want a pretend duchess," Arthur said, pulling a ring from his pocket. Not the showy Ashbourne diamond she had worn earlier, but a simple, elegant band of gold with a deep blue sapphire. His mother's ring. "I want a partner. I want the woman who stole my horse and saved my soul. Lydia, will you marry me? For real this time?" Tears streamed down Lydia's face, washing away the dust of the road. She looked at the man who had given her shelter, who had fought for her honor, and who looked at her not as a possession, but as an equal. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, Arthur." 1,000 times. He stood and pulled her into a kiss that seared away the memory of every cold night she had ever endured. It was a kiss of promise, of passion, and of a dawn that signaled a new day for the house of Ashbourne. 6 months later, the bells of the village church rang out across the valley. The new Duchess of Ashbourne did not arrive in a carriage. In a break with all tradition, she rode to the church on the back of a massive black stallion named Titan, with the Duke riding at her side. And as they walked down the aisle, the gossips of the ton whispered that the cold Duke's heart hadn't just thawed. It was beating, finally, for the stable girl who had become his queen. And that is the story of how Lydia Hart went from a fugitive hiding in the straw to the Duchess who tamed the Ice Duke. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the things we run away from lead us exactly to where we are meant to be. Arthur thought he wanted revenge, and Lydia thought she wanted safety. But in the end, they found that neither was possible without trust and love. I really hope you enjoyed this dramatic historical romance. If you felt that satisfaction when Titan knocked Lord Frederick to the ground, hit that like button right now. What was your favorite part? Was it the scene in the stables or the final confrontation at the gate? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories of romance, revenge, and instant karma, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.